I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Independent School District number 535. School Board is called to order at 5:38 p.m. Tuesday, May 21st, 2019, in room 137 of the Edison Building. Present at the board table is Mr. Michael Munoz, Superintendent of Schools, and a non-voting ex officio member of the board. Also present is Ms. Wendy Edgar, the Assistant Board Clerk. Ms. Edgar, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Amundson?
Here.
Chair Barlow?
Here.
Ms. Marvin?
Here.
Ms. Nathan?
Here.
Mr. Schleusner?
Here.
Ms. Seelinger?
Here.
Ms. Workman?
Here.
After you're able, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
.01 approval of agenda. This is an action item.
Move approval.
Second.
Mr. Munoz, will
There are no changes to the agenda.
Move approval.
Still second it.
any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Announcements and communications, Mr. Munoz.
Yes, first I'm going to call Mr. John Bartus up, and we're going to recognize some students tonight.
So this is the fourth year in a row that we've had young women recognized by the National Center for Women in Information Technology. We have the largest group this year, and we're going to let them, talk about their interest in IT. I have had 3 of the 4 students in IT Launch, which just started a couple years ago, so I'm very happy about that. Wendy Sun is at JM and was in the class this fall, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Wendy. I'm a junior at John Marshall, and I've just taken the entry-level IT launch class, and I intend to keep going, and I'm going to take another AP computer science class next year. Mr. Bartus has helped me a lot in that class, and he's encouraged me to start my own coding club. I started one second semester this year at JM, and I plan to continue it next year.
No, you do. Oh, or is Angela? Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Jenny?
Sure.
Hello, my name is Jenny McCright, and I'm a manager in IT at Mayo. And for the last 5 years, I've been working with a program called Technovation. In the last 4, I've been working with Anjali Danthi, and I've watched her grow from a very, very quiet person to a leader who's very confident. Anjali?
I'm Anjali Danthi, and I've been involved in Technovation for 4 years now. During the past 4 years, I've learned many skills, including speaking skills, coding skills when I developed my apps, and I've also learned how to write a business plan. I've also learned how to lead a team, as I've been project manager for my team for the past 2 years now. Because of Technovation, my passion for computer science also grew. In the future, I'd like to pursue a career in biomedical engineering. So I'd like to thank Ginny and all my mentors who've helped me through the years.
I'm Eric Dirksen. I teach math and computer science at Mayo High School, and I teach the IT launch class, as does Mr. Bartus, and as well as the AP computer science class. So this year I have Kaisa Arnold in the AP class, as well as she took the IT launch class from Mr. Bartus. So she's a sophomore. She's just getting started. So.
Mr. Dirk said, I'm Kaisa. I've taken the IT launch and AP computer science classes, and I've been really grateful for all the opportunities I've had to learn about computer science in the school system, and as well as outside of it. And I've had great teachers, and I'm looking to pursue a career in the field.
last but not least, we've got Rhonda Hintermeister, and she's a senior at Mayo High School, and she took AP Computer Science from me also, and IT Launch from Mr. Bartus, right? No, you didn't. Just me. There we go.
As he mentioned, I'm Rhonda Hintermeister, a senior at Mayo, and I was involved in computer science largely due to my dad, who has worked in computers basically my whole life. And I'm going into computer engineering for a major at St. Thomas this coming year. So, thank you.
So the National Center of Women in Information Technology recognize 40 young women in Minnesota every year out of hundreds of applicants. And so to have 4 of those young women here coming from Rochester is quite an accomplishment. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. At this time, I'll call Julie Brock, Executive Director of Cradle-to-Career, to give us an update.
Hello, and thank you. Cradle-to-Career, we hosted our community event at John Marshall High School on May 1st, 2019. Thanks so much to the staff and to the leadership at John Marshall. They were fantastic. And Eric was so accommodating to us to be there. We had over 125 participants who interacted with our population results through a Turn the Curve activity. And essentially what we asked them to do is to take that population result and to start to build the story behind it and figure out what our trend line is for that. It was led by our facilitator, Christina Wright-Peterson. It was important for our community to interact with the data. We call it data light. It's not that they're deep diving, but they're getting exposed to what that common language is, and we see this as a great opportunity to help our community speak the same language. And so that's what we did. It will also be processed by our data analysts to be able to inform the networks as they're working on these population results to see what the community has to say about it. What we found really important is that it was important for our community to interact with this data in this way. We see oftentimes when people only observe data, it's easy for them to point fingers, say it's too big, to walk away. And happily, we had our community members asking, how can we do better? On a really cool note, one of my favorite stories, an educator said, it is the first time I have been in a community event like this that didn't place any blame on educators. Truly, our community wants to know, as a community, how they could do better, and that was amazing. So I wanted to share that with you because I think that's important. So on your tables, you have been given a button. This was our call to action at our community event, is to take this button. It's pinned to a slip of paper. That paper is our mission. It's often when we're dealing with something like Cradle-to-Career, which is more about infrastructure instead of programmatic, touch points with students is to get confused as to what it is. And so we would ask that you take this button, put it in a prominent place, like on your bag, on your school bus, on your lapel, or even on a bulletin board in your place of work. And when people ask you about it, say, Cradle-to-Career provides data facilitation and accountability for our partner organizations working to get kids the resources they need when they need them so they can be successful. We believe that our community wants excellence for everyone. I agree. I just want to thank you again for being such an amazing community partner. So thank you. If there's any questions that you have, please let me know.
Chair Orkin? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
School Board Committee assignment updates, Director Marvin.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to call Phony Marcelino, who is one of our student school board members up here. And as she's coming, I want to make one comment about the dedication of the Riverside mural today. I know other board members will speak about that, but I think it's important for the board and for everyone to know it was a celebration. There was a live band. The entire elementary school was in the gym dancing, and Mr. Munoz was dancing with them. And I think it's important for you to know the superintendent, he's got moves. Just putting it out there. Phony, thank you for coming up.
Hi, I'm Tony Marcelino. I'm a senior from Mayo. And this year at Student School Board, we focused a lot on mental health. We thought that it was important to try and talk about how to break down the stigmas that's going on in our schools. And we've seen a lot of people come up and talk about how they think that if they talk about what's going on, that they'll either be judged or they'll be seen a different way. So we wanted to talk about that. And we also wanted to advocate for more resources. And thankfully, we were able to have mental health specialists hired at all our high schools, as well as next year counselors for the elementary schoolers. So we're just really grateful for that. And next year, we hope to focus on inclusion and equity, and also talk about like racism and what's going on in our schools to try and combat that. Personally, at Mayo, we want to focus on the equity portion of that, make sure that all our students have the same opportunities as each other, and make sure that we can find a way for all of us to be successful. And we also would want to know that, want you guys to know that we think it's really important and valuable for student input, because we're all here because of students, and students are our main focus. So I think it's really important to have students in mind.
Thank you, Phony. And you should know she's going to be attending the University of Minnesota next year, so it's going to be Rochester's loss that she'll be leaving here temporarily. But you're going to be an amazing addition to the U of M, so congratulations, and thank you.
Thank you.
Director Workman.
I attended the Rochester Public School Foundation since our last meeting, and we are going to, instead of having one grant cycle, next year we're going to do a trial of 2 grant cycles. There have been a lot of submissions for grants. I would like to just talk about 2 that I had the opportunity to attend where grants were given. One was the Humans of JM art exhibit, and that's been extended for another 2 weeks. So if you haven't had the opportunity to go, please do so. The pictures and the statements, little short paragraphs from the students are amazing in terms of their experiences in life, and some of it is very sobering. So
it's at the Art Center.
That's at the Art Center, thank you. And then the other one was this morning at the Rochester Alternative Learning Center. Healing Rhythms had done a music class with some of the students there, and they presented a program of music this morning. There were probably, maybe eight students involved in this, and it was just really awesome to see them up there performing, not only for the adults who attended, but also for their classmates. And that sometimes is the hardest thing to do, to perform for your peers. So I congratulate them on that, and thanks once again to RPSF for helping to provide that opportunity.
Director Seelinger.
Thank you. I attended the spring area meeting for the Minnesota State High School League, new committee forming. Quite interesting information. Asked Mr. Queasley for some follow-up on that, and I will read from the email he sent me. The Minnesota State High School League does have bylaws, and they passed a few new things in their bylaws that I thought were relevant and important to serve our students. So all these three short statements passed. A student whose parents were never married, who resides with one parent and moves to reside with another parent, will be eligible to participate. Those have to do with divorced family dynamics, and I think that's divorced or not married family dynamics. Foreign exchange students who stay in Minnesota for an additional year under different status, international student, will be eligible at the JV or below varsity level. And a student who has multiple transfers will now have no more than 1 year of varsity ineligibility. Ooh, that's a tough one for me to say. So all good things to help serve our students. Other things, my takeaways, I know Mr. Queasley will be back with us this summer, and appreciate that. I really appreciated the tone of the meeting, as it was my first time, talking about sort of the collaborative and collegiate spirit of the other groups, not only the State High School League, but also the coaches and the referees and umpires and those folks that they need, all kind of working together to serve our students in athletics and activities that fall under their purview in the statute.
Director Nathan.
So I attended the latest meeting of the Community Curriculum Council, which is the new and improved name of the Community Curriculum and Instruction Advisory Council. And we have some exciting plans for the fall to get feedback on the World's Best Workforce Report. And we're doing it in collaboration with our Cradle-to-Career community partners. We'll be using that Turn the Curve exercise to look at the data that's in the World's Best Workforce. And we have targeted staff and community members who are going to reach out to different sectors of the community to make sure that we are identifying feedback from all sorts of parent groups and student interest groups and underrepresented families. So I really appreciate the willingness of the staff and the other participants in the CCC to think about a new approach, and watch your district communications this fall for the opportunity to give your feedback.
Director Marvin.
One of the great things about being a school board member is you get invited into classrooms, and a number of us attended different classrooms to see what was going on. Two things I was able to do this last week was to attend Mr. Kowalski's a band teacher at Friedel, to hear his band play a piece of music that was composed by the woman who was Skyping with the band as they were playing it, and then they were able to ask her questions about why she wrote what she wrote, and she was able to give them some feedback. And then a few of us also attended Ms. Eling's, who's a media specialist at Elton Hills, her B-Bots, teaching first graders how to code with little
robots, toy robots.
Yeah, those. The kids were into it. She was wonderful. It was so exciting. So I just love doing that, and it's just such a great education about the exciting things that are going on in our district.
Director Edmondson.
The Rochester Olmsted Youth Commission has been advocating for 100% renewable energy, and they made a video, and the video is hoping to get more views because that is votes into a contest. So while I can't read the very long URL here for you to click on, if you go to YouTube and search for Climate Smart Communities and then find the Rochester video, viewing that video will be a vote for their video. And we have some pretty amazing students here in Rochester and Olmsted County.
Well, finally, before we move forward, I had the opportunity to attend just a short while ago the grand opening of the Y Early Childhood Education Center. And what a wonderful event and a new opportunity for Rochester. Some minimum 150 families will be able to be served. And the great thing about this is it's not a new collaborative effort, if you will, or it is not a new effort, it is an ongoing collaboration of efforts that RPS and the Y has been able to enjoy over the years, and we look forward to the continuation of that. If you haven't had the opportunity to swing by, please do so. And they are currently looking for families, children to serve. So if you know of any, please send them that way. Moving forward, our consent agenda. Does anyone want any item removed for separate consideration? Director Workman.
Yes, I just would like to address item 4.04, the recertification of school district population for community services levy. I guess this is sort. Let's remove. Oh, it's sorry. Okay. Mine, I'm not up to date.
No problem.
Sorry. Okay.
No. You remove it from consideration.
It's been moved.
Oh.
Where?
So now you need to, it sits until we deal with the rest of it.
I make a motion to move the rest of the consent agenda items.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Munoz?
Yes, we have 3 retirements. Sorry.
Well, but Julie wants to talk about that.
I was just so excited about this. Each year, we approve a resolution to recertify the population of the district, which determines certain levies for the community services general revenue. And I think that probably most people in the community aren't aware of this funding source for community education. But what really struck me was that the last census was 129,056 people in Rochester, and it has increased to 134,641. And so when we approve this in a few minutes, then this resolution will be sent to the Office of the State Demographer for recertification. So I just wanted to point that out since it is an action item.
If I may, in response to what points you're making, so how often are these surveys taking? And of course, we have the 2020.
It's annually, and every year it's always just been in consent. I guess it's just never apparently didn't.
I thought it might be helpful for our new board members since they have a whole lot to learn as well as the community. So,
thank you.
Yep.
And is it correct to say that the population of the Rochester Public School District is larger than the population of Rochester? And should we clarify why?
Say that again.
You give us the answer.
So the population of the Rochester Public School District is larger than the population of the city of Rochester.
Yes.
Yes.
We actually have a map that shows that there's a big chunk south of the city limits that is part of our district, and some north and east. So yeah, much larger than the city piece of that. I didn't hear the first part.
Yeah, population.
To include a small chunk of Waukesha County.
Yes.
I misspoke. It is Rochester Public School District.
Good point.
Mr. Munoz?
Yes, all right.
Move approval.
Just let me know when you're ready.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Can I have a second?
I second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Munoz?
Are we sure?
Yes.
I believe so.
All right, we have some retirements we'd like to recognize. The first one is Catherine DeSole. She's a 4th grade teacher at Falwell Elementary. Her retirement is effective the end of the day, June 3rd, 2019, and she's been with the district 20 years. Next one is Kara Vig, teacher of English learners at Churchill and Hoover Elementary Schools. Retirement effective the end of the day, June 4th, 2019. She's been with the district 11 years. And then a non-scheduled retirement, Elaine Nordyke, licensed practical nurse at George Gibbs Elementary School. Retirement effective the end of the day, July 8th. And she's been with the district 10 years. So we thank these individuals for their service to our district.
.0 equity update. Information item, Mr. Munoz.
All right. In the past, we've been having schools come in and share some of the equity work they're doing. So tonight, I thought we'd mix it up a little bit, and I'm going to put you through a little activity that, to give an example of some of the work that we're doing with our leadership group, which is all of our building administrators, directors, coordinators, cabinet. So we're going to do the My World, My Lens activity. You noticed in front of you, there's different color beads in little cups. All of you need to grab a little baggie.
I guess we should.
What I'm going to do is ask you, and I guess I learned, you're never too old to learn. I learned that these are the kind of beads that you iron and melt. I didn't know that, but that's what they're used for. But we're going to use them for a little different purpose tonight. You'll notice up on the screen, there's a different color represents different racial groups. So I'm going to ask you a set of questions, and you choose the color that represents the answer to that question, okay? So the first one is, most of the people in my immediate family are. And then you put that color bead in your bag. Okay, question 2. Most of the people in my extended family are. Okay. Question 3. As a child, most of the people in my neighborhood were. As a child, most of the people in my neighborhood were. Question 4. As a child, most of the people who came over to my house were. Most of the people who came over to my house were. Number 5. As a child, most of the people whose homes I visited were. Okay, question 6. As a child, most of the kids I played with were. Question 7. Most of my elementary and primary teachers were. Question 8. Most of my high school or secondary teachers were. Question 9. When I was between the ages of 0 to 10, most of my classmates were. Number 10. As a child, most of the people I worshiped with or went to church with were. Okay, question 11. My current closest friend is. My current closest friend is. If you don't have a friend, just pretend that you do. Question number 12. My current significant other, or who I wish was my significant other, is.
I get so excited about that question.
Number 13. Most of my college classmates were. Most of my college classmates were.
Oh, college? Do you remember that? College. I thought he said colleagues.
Post-secondary education were. Number 14. Most of my college or post-secondary professors were. Number 15. Most of the people I spent time with socially are. Most of the people I spend time with socially are. Number 16. Most of the people I currently work with are. Most of the people I work with are. Number 17. The person I consider my mentor is. Number 18. My greatest role model is. I told leadership that those two should probably be blue for those two answers, but they didn't always agree with me.
That was subtle, very subtle.
Number 19. My favorite athlete or author is. Number 20. Most of the musical artists I listen to are. Most of the musical artists I listen to are.
Can we choose more than one?
21. Most of the actors or actresses in TV shows or movie I watch are. 22. My superintendent is.
Awesome. Oh.
I don't think we have a color for that one, but number 23. The students I serve are predominantly what?
Okay. That's a trick question.
Predominantly RPS.
Deep thinker, you're going to have to pick that up.
Okay. 24. The teachers and administrators in my district are predominantly. Okay, when you're done, zip your little baggie shut so we don't lose any of those valuable beads. So if you could hold up your bag and look through it, and what I did is I had them at their tables look at each other's and have a conversation about what they see, why they see that. We talked about, are you missing any colors? What colors is it, and why are you missing that color? They were asked, would you change any contents of your bag? If so, how? If not, why not? We talked about considering your students. What do you think if we had our students in our district do this? What would their bags look like? Then I went and talked about them that there's no wrong bag because that bag represents our experiences, our background. But we have to understand that our bag may look different than some of our students. And that's okay, but we have to understand that everybody's bag's a little different. We have to understand their experiences, either culturally or how they were raised, that it's always not easy. It's not as easy because we a lot of times refer back to our beads when we make decisions and how we look at things. But we have to understand that the people we work with or work for, their bags look a little different than maybe our bags. So this is just a little activity to get some conversation going. They've been keeping journals throughout the year. They had a journal about this afterwards, but also encourage them that this would be a great activity to do at the beginning of next school year to kind of lead into the equity work that we will be doing. So many of the administrators have already asked for the slides and the questions. So an activity they can do, and I'll probably do this, I do get about 20-30 minutes with new teachers in August, so I'll probably do that activity as I talk about the equity work that we're going to do. This is one of the activities that I learned at the most recent equity conference that I attended. So just kind of wanted to share with you a sample of some of the work that we're doing with our leadership in the area of equity. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's powerful. We appreciate that. Seven 7.01, approval of non-continuation agreement, a briefing item, Mr. Munoz.
All right, Mr. Mark Queasley, Century's Activity Director, will brief us on this agenda item.
Good evening, Chair Barlow, Mr. Munoz, Ms. Edgar, and board members. Before you is a briefing item, as Mr. Munoz stated, on our non-continuation agreements with some schools here in town. We'll talk about how this one is different than the next item on the agenda, but non-continuation schools are schools that are not members of the Minnesota State High School League. They have their own governing body, which is outside of the Rochester Public Schools, and they only go through 8th grade. And so these students would like opportunities to participate in our high school programs of the Minnesota State High School League bylaws. And so we need to assign them. In the past, we've assigned an entire school to one of our schools between the three schools. Example, RCLS has been attached to John Marshall, Resurrection Lutheran has been attached to Century, and Rochester Montessori has been attached to Mayo High School. Now, due to some feedback from the administrators in those buildings, they asked us if we would consider doing this sport by sport. So as we look for our new 2-year agreement, we ventured into this and sent, I put together a Google Doc. We sent it out to the building administrators. They forwarded it to all of the incoming 6th graders and 7th graders going into 7th and 8th grade. And so we have feedback based on that as to what sports those students are interested in. So then we desegregated that information, split the ties, flipped the coins, and basically assigned students based on the majority to a sport, to a school. And so that's what's before you this evening is the list of those that are attached to Rochester Central Lutheran, Rochester Montessori, and Resurrection Lutheran. We also took into account if there is a new student that moves into that school that didn't get a chance to fill out the survey, we have kind of a catch clause in each one of those agreements where the students still can participate, but we've already predetermined what school they would participate in. And so that's the information. Yesterday I received back the third copy of the school board or the governing board resolutions from each one of the 3 schools. So each one of the 3 non-continuation schools are in favor of this, and it's just our turn to make that step in the process. And so this would be for 2 years of an agreement, and then we would reevaluate it or retool it again in 2 years based on the interest.
Mark, can you explain, these are just while they're in middle school. Can you explain what happens once they become high school age?
Yeah, then they go back to their attendance area of where their parents reside. And so this actually helps us try and get those students, as much as we can, participating in their feeder school now. So in the past, we'd have students at Century or at Mayo that were attending RCLS, playing on the golf team, playing on the tennis team, running cross country that were eventually students at Mayo and Century in 9th grade. And this would help those students participate directly with their feeder school.
Director Seelinger.
But just to clarify on that, this does not assure that a student in any one sport will be participating in their feeder high school based on their sport and their middle school alternate attendance building.
That is correct. There, as I desegregated the information, there's probably 5 to 6 students that weren't in the majority, that there were maybe 3 7th or 8th graders at one school and 1 8th grader at another. So we went with the majority and assigned them that way. And all the administrators were in those feeder schools were fine with that process as well. So yes, thanks for the clarification on that.
Director Marvin.
Well, unless Ms. Seelinger has do you have a question?
Yeah, just follow up. I just think this is another opportunity to highlight and showcase how our district works with other schools and districts, or these aren't districts, they're buildings, alternate programs. And I think I really appreciate the time you took to kind of look at more individually and where how these students participate and where they will participate. I know, sometimes there's a little, difference of opinion where we're public school and we're working with our private or faith-based schools, but I think this is a great way to serve our students, and as they come into our high school, that they are more welcome. So I appreciate your work on that.
Yeah, I appreciate, Deborah, you calling that out, because this is actually going to be a little more work for the activities directors to monitor the kids in multiple sports, whereas you went to this school, this is the only place you can play. But I think it was something that their directors wanted and asked us if we would consider, and they were willing to do that, even though knowing it's going to be a little more management to make sure everybody's playing where they need to be
Where
playing.
they're supposed to be, yes.
Director Marvin.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm anticipating maybe Director Marvin's next words, which is there a chance that there may be people who may be unhappy with this and wish to voice their opinions before we would move it to action and vote on it, so that we might want to leave it sit 2 weeks to give people a chance to weigh in?
No, they've been actually pushing us to get this done.
Okay.
We did the survey, I want to say right before winter break, and then we had this wonderful winter and a great spring season, and so I'm the one that kind of slowed the process down, just trying to find the time to disaggregate the information. But all 3 school administrators reached out to me and said they are very pleased with the process and the outcome, and they really appreciate us looking at this.
So I think Ms. Amundsen was going to move this to action.
I think Ms. Marvin was.
And I was going to second it.
Second.
Discussion.
Wait, who made the motion?
Marvin.
Gotcha. Go for it.
Well, I appreciate the thoroughness you engaged in. I did, prior to tonight's meeting, had 2 questions, both of which you already addressed, and I appreciate that. And is there some reason why, not only in terms of co-op agreements, but what's the term used, non-continuation schools tend to be limited initially to a 2-year introductory rollout?
Okay, so the non-continuation, good clarification there. We are trying to make it like a co-op, and that we have to look at it for 2 years. And it also offers consistency for those families, that if I have a 7th grade child, it's following for 2 years, so that that student has the chance of staying eligible in both buildings. And when we explain that to them as well, they like the idea. You could renew non-continuations every year, but they like the opportunity of us looking at this over 2 years for this, just for the clarity for that family in the transition from their school to our high schools.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other discussion? All in favor of moving to action?
Aye.
Opposed?
Sorry, it's wordy.
It's quite the resolution, I might add.
It's just the very result. Be resolved.
Oh, okay. Be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 535 does hereby agree to the non-continuation agreement and all MSHL activities for students in grades 7 through 8 commencing in 2020 school year.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Cleese.
Awesome. This really helps because we start summer stuff and everybody wants to be in the right camp and the right school for those as well. So that's very helpful.
Okay. 7.02, Cooperative Agreements Process. Informational item, Mr. Munoz.
Yes, at this time, Mr. Brian Erkey, John Marshall Activities Director, and Mr. Jeff Whitney, Mayo Activities Director, will be joining Mr. Queasley to provide some information for us on co-ops.
Good evening.
Again, thank you, Mr. Barlow, Mr. Munoz, Ms. Edgar, and board members. We have been asked to kind of put together a 101 for you on cooperative agreements, and this is kind of our snapshot of that for you this evening. As you are well aware, we follow the mission of the Rochester Public Schools to inspire, challenge, and empower, and it also mirrors what the educational opportunities that we're trying to provide in our classroom setting, in interscholastic athletics, and the leadership of the activities that we're doing. And then also look to other member schools for the support, that collegiality, so to speak, in all of our activities. And so those all go hand in hand for us. As we look at cooperative sponsorships, and as we talked a little bit about non-continuation, you got to kind of change your focus here a little bit. Co-op schools are members of the high school league already. And so member schools can then enter into cooperative agreements. Parents cannot, nor can the students. From time to time, we will get emails from parents saying, we want a co-op. We say, no, we need to send you back to that member school for that possibility. And again, they must be registered in that sport or activity under the Minnesota State High School League in order to be in an agreement. It must be more than 2 member schools. And then also, now it's more prevalent in our process than ever before. We have to get approval from our competitive conferences, our administrative regions, to make sure it passes the sniff test with them when we're competing against all those other schools. And then ultimately, the board of directors of the Minnesota State High School League sponsors those, or affirms those. And then the cooperative agreements are for a minimum of 2 years. And then under the bylaw, it's always been in there that a school, if they don't want to be in a co-op anymore, they can choose to dissolve it without an agreement from the other school. And so they have a 1-year clause in there that if you give them a year notice, you can walk away from it as long as you try to give that year's notice. Now, it can be less than that if both schools mutually agree. And we had one of those that was in this sunset process that wanted to dissolve a year earlier, so we were able to do that as well.
As we move forward and we look at current cooperative agreements as we're entering the 2019-20 school year, right now in adaptive athletics, soccer, floor hockey, and softball, current participants are Mayo, John Marshall, Century, Byron, and Rochester Lourdes. Girls swim and dive cooperative with John Marshall and Lourdes. Boys swim and dive with John Marshall and Lourdes. If you look back at the PowerPoint, the numbers in parentheses are the number of students from each respective school that's in that activity. In girls alpine ski, currently participants range all the way from, so it seems like the Iowa border to the Twin Cities. John Marshall, Lake City, Lewiston, Altura, Chatfield, Lourdes, Byron, and Wabasha Kellogg. And in boys alpine ski, John Marshall, Lewiston, Altura, Wabasha Kellogg, and Lourdes.
Okay, and so we've been involved with co-ops for a number of years, and they've gone through all kinds of different stages, but this is kind of a little bit of a history of cooperative agreements and how some of them have been dissolved. We've dissolved cooperative agreements in the past that we no longer have student participation in with Schaefer Academy. I believe that was a hockey player up at Century. Dover Iota, they were involved in gymnastics. Byron, Lake City, Stewartville, Casa Manorville, Lourdes, number of different activities covered in those co-ops, but most of those have all been dissolved other than a handful with Lourdes. Rochester Public Schools has dissolved cooperative agreements when schools can't sustain a program. So when we can't, or when schools involved can sustain a program. So when we are able to sustain that varsity program on our own, we have enough kids in our high school program to make sure that we can field an activity that's strong enough to compete and have numbers to compete. We offer that activity in a varsity only with no cooperative sponsorships. Adding cooperative agreements with Rochester's public schools is a difficult sell within the Big Nine. Mark and the region, Mark kind of touched on that earlier. We are the 3 largest schools enrollment-wise in the Big Nine Conference. Our enrollments range all the way up to about 1,500 in Century, down to 13-something when it comes to our high school league enrollment. That's adjusted a little bit due to free and reduced lunch. Many of the schools, over probably half of the schools in our conference, are 300 to 600 students smaller than us, all the way down to, I believe, Albert Lee and Winona and Red Wing are all in the 700 range for enrollment. So that's often a hard sell to the Big Nine Conference if we're trying to add co-ops, add students into our activity programs from other schools, making us bigger than we already are. On June 21st in 2016, at a board meeting here, we dissolved all the agreements with the Rochester Public Schools, dissolved them in wrestling, boys hockey, boys lacrosse, girls lacrosse, and adaptive athletics. I think that was a pretty sweeping, we dissolved many of the co-ops that were in place at that time, except for a handful of them. And there was a Lourdes agreement that was left in place at that time to allow ninth graders that were currently in some of those co-ops to continue from kind of grandfather them in from that 2015-16 school year through this school year, 2018-9, when they graduated in their senior year. And most of them, as we said, are fulfilling that final year of that agreement right now. Okay. And then other factors involved in the co-ops that we looked through in that meeting in 2016. The Lourdes administration was notified that they notified all their families of the decision to dissolve the programs, those cooperative programs. And then adapted co-ops, we still have a few of those in place, as you know, and I think you just okayed one here not too many meetings ago. They have extremely limited opportunities across the state. A lot of schools obviously don't have enough kids to offer programs standalone. So we've continued to offer member schools opportunities in adaptive athletics to co-op.
The current alpine ski cooperative we have in boys and girls alpine ski at John Marshall is a little bit strange in that we don't have that many participants at JM compared to Century and Mayo, who has enough. They have enough students to participate that and have their own program. But by co-oping at John Marshall with all those schools I mentioned, it allows us to compete in the Big Nine. The Big Nine Conference can have a championship because there's a number of teams you must have a minimum for kids to participate in a conference championship, to be awarded all conference and individual awards such as that. The swim and dive cooperative that currently exists with Lourdes at John Marshall is in major part because Lourdes doesn't have the facilities to have a swim program in their facility, so they use our pool and they swim with our boys and girls programs at John Marshall.
We've also believed that continuing a cooperative agreement for competitive reasons is not the belief of our department or the brevity of what the Minnesota State High School believes what those co-ops should be. And as a former board member, we always were asking those questions. Are you truly doing it to be more competitive or offer an opportunity to sustain a varsity program? And so that's a belief that we continually talk about within the department is what are our numbers? Are we trying to sustain that program? And will this help us sustain that program? And then we utilize cooperative agreements to sustain those varsity programs and hopefully get to the point where we can get back to on our own. Sometimes when schools go into these agreements, they don't look at a sunset date. They're in place and they just continue and continue and continue. And that's what makes them so hard sometimes to get out of is once you do get your participation numbers back to sustain the program, and one of the schools doesn't have those numbers, then you're looking at some hardships or some hard feelings there when you can finally run the program yourself. And then, again, we have a difficult time offering competitive programs, offering co-ops for one school, and yet we turn around and turn down other schools. Just in the last week, I've had 4 to 5 requests from either charter schools, outside area schools, or other non-public schools in Rochester wanting to co-op in our activities. And most of the time, it ends up being with Century High School, and many of our programs, we are sustaining our own programs, so we don't add, but yet we have some in place that we struggle with from time to time. So anyway, that's kind of our little 101 of this, and we're here to help with questions if anybody has some for us.
Questions of the board? Director Marvin.
Sort of foundational one. I understand that basically the reason that our district would co-op with another district is because we don't have enough students in a sport to run that sport. If we started co-oping with other districts when we had enough students, it would look like we were trying to fill up our teams so that we'd be more competitive, and that's an issue. Let's say that we have girls hockey and we're short on girls hockey players, and there were 3 other schools that wanted to co-op with Rochester and girls hockey. How do you decide which one or ones to co-op with?
It'd be the program that had the least amount of numbers. So probably logically, if, say, Century didn't have enough kids in their varsity program, they would be the ones. You can't co-op the same kids, same school with multiple schools. So like Dover Yoda couldn't send 2 kids to Mayo and 2 to JM and 2 to Century. They would all 6 go to Century if they were the ones that were deficient in numbers. Say they didn't have enough, they were the school that didn't have enough to go. So you'd have to, there's some rules in regards to which co-ops you can form through the high school league and some procedures on how to do that, and that's how we determine it'd be the team that was deficient in numbers, basically, substantially deficient.
Well, too, we look at our numbers. Somebody may look at it and say, well, gosh, that's kind of small. But then when you go to the Big 9 to get permission, you look at the Winona's or the Albert Lead, and they're fewer than we are, but we're the ones saying we want to co-op. So they don't have much mercy for us when they see that. Yeah.
Your girls hockey program question is right on track, because for a while Century was with Mayo High School, and then when Mayo's numbers got large and John Marshall's were small, then Century shifted over to participating with John Marshall. Then our numbers got to the point where we could sustain, and then the conference said, whoa, wait a minute, you really should have 3 programs. So then we did end up having 3 programs. Now, the numbers in girls hockey for all 3 of us are not real large. Brian probably has the smallest numbers, but as Mr. Munoz said, currently other schools in the Big 9 Conference have the same size roster, and they are using 7th and 8th graders and 9th graders to field their varsity team just like we are. So demographically, very similar.
To each of you, thank you. It was important, I think, to give the board the opportunity to hear the rationale. We basically simply heard the complaint, or the concern rather, not complaint, voiced, and you guys have done an excellent job in providing to us a working understanding, and I believe informing and educating parents and community as well as to the why, and allows us to be in a better position to move forward. I think there's one additional question, Director Seelinger.
Thank you. So this is kind of an odd question. So I'll start with it and then I'll explain it. What is the benefit to the other district? So we know that their students are coming in to be able to play with our athletes, which is wonderful because we're all about students. But to that end, are the agreements, is there variety in agreements, or are they pretty standard? And so things like they come in and they participate as one of our athletes, but perhaps the outlying school, district, whatever, doesn't support the team in the same way as the home school would. Does that make sense?
I think I know where you're going. We used to charge a cost per participant for each student that would come to us from an area school when we had those Dover Yoda, Chatfield, Byron situations. And then we didn't charge for anybody that was within the Rochester Public Schools attendance boundaries. So we had a way of recouping some of our costs, but it was not substantial amounts. Excuse me. And then when we were going through some budget reductions, we were trying to desegregate that again, and we thought, you know what, let's move in a different direction for a revenue source other than one student here, one student there, that type of thing. And the second part of your question, I'm sorry, I started to cough and I forgot what your second part was.
I think she was asking, we, besides the costs that both athletes would have, there's additional costs that goes on to the district that's kind of the lead for the co-op. We don't get additional funding from the sending district to help with the transportation and all the other costs that go on with it. Is that kind of
some agreements are such as that.
Yeah. Okay.
So obviously, we charge our fees, but it doesn't cover it. It comes with the dollars that come with the students, but we're not getting those dollars if they come from an outlying other public school district. So many co-ops, it will be transferred directly to that student. I'm going to throw a made-up number. Let's say it's $800. So if you have 3 students, your district would have to pay $2,400 to come. Or sometimes the parents would have to do that, depending on what that district would decide.
But we don't generally do that.
Currently, we do not do that, correct.
Correct.
And the other thing for us is, we're busy. We enjoy the lifestyles that we have. And we're out and about all the time supervising events and going to and from and administering these programs, as Mr. Munoz said, from transportation to officials to casual workers to rain delays to rescheduling, all of those components. And we're doing it for our students plus that school coming in. So there isn't any administrative support coming in that role, although it's hard to put a dollar amount on that as well. So I get your question with that. I wish there was a way sometimes of being able to do that or to share some of those supervisory responsibilities, but it's kind of hard to say, hey, there's a cross-country meet. Would you come over and supervise so I could have a night home with my spouse? But we don't. We absolutely don't. So.
Additional questions? Director Marvin?
Yeah, and just to make it perfectly clear, the agreement that Rochester and Lourdes signed about girls lacrosse, that was signed in 2016, and the agreement was that it would go through 2019, through this school year. So there was a 3-year agreement.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the parents were notified at that time in 2016 at Lourdes of the decision, and the administration supported the decision. They sat here at this table. We vetted the whole process, and it was a very good discussion that night, but I think we came to an understanding that we just aren't all-encompassing, maybe. And at some point, we're turning opportunity away, but we're also trying to create opportunity for the Rochester Public School students first. And I think that's what we're trying to keep as our priority with what we're doing.
Director Nathan, then Workman. Workman?
I think that Director Seelinger and I were the only ones who sat at the board table to enjoy that conversation. And I went back and looked at the minutes, and it's like, boy, there's amendments and things scratched out and everything else. But could you clarify on the slide that says the history? The Lourdes agreement was to allow 9th graders who were in 2015-16 to participate until their senior year was completed, which is this year. So was it just the 9th graders from Lourdes who continued, or the whole team?
That's the thing with a co-op, is you can't pick and choose which students can continue to participate. So at that time, in our discussions with the administration, that group was finishing their 9th grade year. They were locked in eligibility-wise to Lourdes High School because they were already 9th graders into the building, and it would even make it look like, oh, you got to transfer in order to continue to participate. So we felt that 10, 11, and 12, they should be able to continue the brevity of their high school experience at that point.
But if I was a freshman coming in the second year, I knew I'm not going to finish my entire career there because the agreement.
Right. Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yep.
And then I have a follow-up to that. So at this point, or just to clarify, so the co-op really is to benefit our students when we don't have enough.
That's our first priority.
That's our first priority. And then I remember the other piece of the discussion was when we have enough for ours, and then we have a whole bunch of students who aren't from the Rochester Public Schools, that it becomes an issue of fairness in terms of, well, you know, maybe we've just got 16 fantastic players from these other schools, and then the students who are in Rochester Public Schools then would not have a chance to participate.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's the struggle we're having right now.
Right.
With I guess it's not a struggle, the continued conversation about 2 of the co-ops we have in place. The numbers are better than the numbers at one of our other sister schools, and yet we still have a co-op in place, and yet the other sister school is participating just fine with the numbers that they have, without facilities, without other bells and whistles maybe, and so, yeah.
Thank you. Just quickly, because you referenced it, Mark, the eligibility piece, which is doesn't have anything to do with a school district, but if a student, say, was playing girls, whatever, lacrosse, that co-op ends, they can't just move into one of our schools and play because of the eligibility rules based on...
They would only be eligible in that co-op that got dissolved. So if I, as an example, if I'm a Schaefer student, I live in the Century attendance area, that co-op dissolves in girls lacrosse, I can come enroll varsity eligible in girls lacrosse, below varsity eligible in all the other sports for 1 calendar year. So in that sport, they can continue without a penalty. Good
Sorry,
clarification.
Just making the point that it's not all about what we decide here at the board table and our will. It runs into Minnesota State High School League and statutes as well. And so we're all kind of in this together.
Oh, definitely.
Sharon, you guys, again, have done an excellent job in presenting this information. There's no action required on our part.
No.
So, again, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
7.03, Inclement Weather Days Compensation Plan. Informational, Mr. Munoz.
Yes, Mr. John Carlson, Executive Director of Finance, is going to provide some information on how we're going to address the snow day compensation. And Mr. Carl Bakken, Executive Director of HR, will be joining him as well.
Good evening, Chair Barlow, members of the school board, Superintendent Munoz. We're here to give you a little background on snow days and how we're going to handle that going forward here for this year. So in a normal school year, we schedule about 172 school days. State law says you have to have a calendar that shows 165 school days. And you also need to make sure you're providing 850 hours of instruction to your kindergarten students, 935 hours for your grades 1 to 6, and 1,020 hours for grades 7 to 12. We schedule, we're overachievers, we do 1,020 hours for our kindergartners, 1,032 hours for grades 1 to 5, and 1,089 hours for grades 6 to 8, and 1,106 for grades 7 to 12. So in general, we could cancel about 11 days a year and still meet the minimum requirements based on hours. There's a little bit of debate about if you drop below 165 days, what will happen, but we've received written guidance, even including this year, from the Minnesota Department of Education that that's okay, as long as you intended to provide at least 165 days when you started. So fast forward to this winter, we had 10 inclement weather days, and that was probably unprecedented. I look back through the file through 1977 to 78 and all the way forward, and I couldn't find another year where we've had that many days where we closed. So the problem that we had is that some of our employees didn't receive pay on all of those missed days. Now, many of our employees have income protection within their contracts, so through the collective bargaining process, our paraprofessionals and our teachers have received unlimited inclement weather days, meaning they don't lose pay on any day that we close. Other groups like cabinet, myself, superintendent, some of our other managers are required to report every day along with our maintenance workers. And then some groups like clerical, student nutrition services, and non-schedule are kind of a hybrid where they might receive the first 2 or 3 days paid, and then after that they need to use a personal leave day, and if they run out of those, they might have a dock on their paycheck. With our contractor, our main contractor for student for school bus services, they lower the rate that we owe them on an inclement weather day, so we pay them 1/4 of the normal daily rate, and then they turn around and compensate the bus drivers for 1 hour per route missed, so up to 3 hours per day. So they're not getting fully paid for an inclement weather day, but they are getting up to 3 hours per day paid. Due to the unusual number of school closures this year, the legislature did pass a law, so if you wanted to, you could go back and add to your calendar. In golf, that would be called like a mulligan or a gimme or something. And restate your calendar, call the snow days, instructional days, and then you'd go back and you'd pay your employees as if nothing had happened there. We decided after we looked at this law, after we did consultation with our legal team, that we did not need to do that. We felt very comfortable that we've met the minimum number of hours of instruction, so we would not do that. But we still wanted to deal with the two groups of employees, student nutrition services and our non-schedule employees, which are our health office nurses and our mental health practitioners. We wanted to make sure that they were made whole. So what we've come up with is a plan to pay back any of our student nutrition employees up to 8 days of pay beyond the first 2 that they've already been paid for, and then up to 7 days of pay for the non-schedule employees. The cost of this will be about $58,000 plus some FICA taxes and so on in the Student Nutrition Services Fund. That's going to come right out of the fund balance because, as I stated last time, we were not able to sell breakfast and lunches on those days, but given the amount of fund balance we have, we think that's a reasonable investment to make sure our employees are made whole there. And then the non-scheduled group is $90,592. And that would come right out of the general fund. And since that was already part of the budget, we're not losing any state aid, we feel that that's a reasonable expenditure to make for those employees to catch them up. So our intent is to make sure that everybody's paycheck at the end of the day is what it would have been had these excessive number of school closures not happen.
Questions? Kudos.
Just a comment. First of all, Carl, thank you for your input on this. It's the right thing to do, so thank you.
Again, it's good to see that the district is taking care of the employees. But I need to ask the question of, do we feel that this is in any way precedent setting for future years to come?
That's why Carl's here.
Oh.
There was a reason.
We have a memorandum of agreement that we've notified because Student Nutrition Services is a union group, that we will be presenting them with that to say this is non-precedent setting, this is an extreme weather year. So we've notified them that once this goes through board, we will need them to sign on that.
That's a very important point.
You read my mind, so I don't have a
You're
question. Mine was the same as his.
My mind says let's not have 10 snow days next
Yeah,
year, right?
That's up to Carl.
Well, I appreciate how you broke everything down for us, explained it well, and it's not an action item or anything. You're providing information to us. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
7.04, high school registration process. Informational item, Mr. Munoz.
Yes, at this time, Chris Fogarty, principal at Century High School, Tom Olson, principal at Mayo High School. They're going to give us just a little information on the high school registration process and from how it starts and how it ends and how we get students in the various classrooms.
Good evening, Board Chair Barlow, Board members, Ms. Edgar, Superintendent Munoz. Are you able to see the slides that we have?
Yes. Can somebody start him for him?
Shortened slides, but hopefully there's some depth in the information as far as our process that we work together as high school administrators along with the cabinet and the superintendent. When you look at the first set of bullet points there, more of a timeline in regards to the registration guide development is ongoing. So that is working in cooperation with the Curriculum and Instruction Office with our registrars, our assistant principals that work on the registration and building of the master schedule along with the principals during the summer. The board approves the final draft that has been worked on during that time. Excuse me. to come to you for final draft in November. Then the guide is distributed to students. Now we have moved more from the paper copies to the electronic copies in the last couple of years. That gives our families the first opportunity to see what courses are offered in a very thorough document with a lot of great information, not just about courses, but about opportunities for honors diplomas and things like that, depending on the year of the graduation, on what the possible requirements could be for that respective grade. Students receive the guide and the information through the registration process. Our incoming ninth graders, they receive that information during our Panther Nights, Spartan Nights, Rocket Nights. And we also spent some time with the non-public schools that could possibly be interested, if they are those non-continuation schools that may be looking for what they want their high school experience to be for their son or daughter. And students register with the entirety of what they want for their classes, but we also ask them to include alternatives, because if you look at the depth of the classes, the smorgasbord of class offerings, they may not run based off of student enrollment. So we ask that the students really investigate, take the time to look at what other classes that could be alternatives that could be placed in lieu of the class that is not running for their schedule.
Then what we do is the principals and the assistant principals, we get together, we review all the registration data. It takes about a month for us to really compile that complete document and get that together, and we have a shared document that all three schools use together on that. Once we have those numbers, we get together the three schools plus the CTEC school, and we figure out how we can combine to get the classes out at CTEC. What we've done the last couple of years is we've had to come up with some creative schedules to make sure we're offering one class this year, the next year, just to get it more accessible for students and try to maximize the resources that we have out there. When we decide that, Mr. McCraffick usually comes back to Mr. Munoz and says, here's what we're going, does that look good? And I know that goes through cabinet. They give it the rubber stamp, or they say, hey, we want to try a couple more of these classes. We bring those numbers back to our school, and we really just start eliminating classes based on, if we have 5 kids signed up for this class, we can bring those kids down. We look at their alternate, what else, the courses they've signed up for. They sign up for other classes again, and you really whittle that down until you have about 25, 26 kids in a class minimum, trying to get as close to the 32 as we can. And that really is how we do it. It sounds easier than really what it is, but it takes a long time to go through that. The other thing that I just want to say is, once that gets done, we work with our staff to decide who's teaching those classes too. Then, and we send out a document, and we get together with the department chairs in those areas and say, how does this work, and how do we want to move forward? So that's kind of just the abridged version.
Also, too, say for example, I'm a student that signed up for AP Chem, let's just say a foreign language class, but the way the schedule worked out, they're offered the same period. So then the student has to make a decision, do I want AP Chem or do I want this other class? So that happens as well sometimes, right?
Yeah, I'll speak for Mayo. We have over 23,000 course requests in our school, and so when we take that much time to bring it down, there's a lot of classes, especially when you get into some of those singleton classes, which means there's only going to be one class run. AP classes are like that, your music classes are like that, a lot of your foreign language classes are like that. And a lot of the kids are signing up for all of those classes. The schedule has to place those at times where the teacher has the 5 classes and it just fits for rooms, things like that. There are some conflicts that occur, and the students do have to make those choices whether they're going to take that class or the other. The other thing that we do, I think we do a nice job, at least our assistant principals really do, is accounting too. For example, we have about 10 kids at Mayo that signed up. There's about 6-7 kids at Century and about 15 kids at JM, and JM runs that class online, or Century comes to Mayo for a Power Mac class and we combine. So we're really trying to pool our students together a lot more. In my 20 years, that's become a much better collaborative process than it was in the beginning. We really do a nice job of working together on that, and the registrars really put that all together.
Well, we saw an example tonight with the students who were here. There were multiple schools taking the same class from different high schools.
Right.
Director Marvin.
Let's say a student signs up for a class, and 6 weeks later he comes in. He signs up in the winter. 6 weeks later he comes in and says, I've thought about it. I want to drop that class. It's not a graduation requirement. Can you tell that student, no, you signed up for it, you cannot drop it?
6 weeks. So if we were to go from January to
Well,
February.
or whatever. I mean, he was going to
Yeah.
take 7 classes and decides to take 6.
Sure.
He wants to drop world literature. He wants to drop contemporary literature. Can you tell him, no, you signed up for it, you have to take it?
We typically don't try to take that tone, obviously, with the students. There might be a good reason why, as to what they're looking at, what other opportunities they have, maybe a different interest. So the reason I caught up on your 6 weeks question there is because 5 months later, once August rolls around for our typical schedule pickup in August, what the child thought they were going to do, what the student thought they were going to do back in February sounded like a really good idea. But then I know for Century we'll field up to 900 to 1,000 schedule requests to change courses. And we really prioritize, obviously, needs versus wants, meaning the need of, that they have full schedules, the 3.0 credits per semester, and then also the required courses. Those will get priority in regards to that type of situation. There are chances that the kid will be told no. Now, we look at their credits, if that was a 7th choice to a 6th choice, because that objective is to get the 24 credits and the 15.5 and 8.5 respectively between required and elective courses. So if there's another opportunity through a mentorship, through a different work experience program that the student has more interest in, and we have the opportunity to give that to that student, we will do all we can to meet their request.
Director
Workman.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I know who I am. So just to continue the question that you asked, so supposing you're just barely at the maximum of the minimum. Okay, so do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. And you have 3 students or 4 students who come in August and they say, I don't want to take the class. I'm assuming that the staffing has already been assigned. Do you continue with the class, or do you tell the other 20 students, sorry, too many of your classmates dropped this class, we're not going to run it after all? How do you handle that?
I've never had that happen where that many kids would drop that much of a class.
Okay.
Ever
But I mean,
happen.
I'm assuming that since you've already budgeted for
Yes.
it, you would still honor.
Where you may
other
have that
students.
happen is a second semester, say, where it could happen is the 4th year of mathematics. You may see that in math analysis because the student has already met their Algebra 2 requirement per state statute and the district requirement. So they're already using that math as an elective, so they may take first semester of a math analysis. And we can look at our trend data and our attrition rate to say, okay, we've already had that staffing, but we may be able to use that staffing within another area. So for example, trying to create a smaller intermediate algebra class for that second semester, that may be a case where something like that could happen. But it's typically, from what I've seen, at the semester time versus that significant of a drop in August to all be in one class.
The only thing I would add to that is teachers go into the profession because they love kids. And so if there's certain classes that they know a kid wanted, I've had teachers come forward and say, hey, you can add this and I'll do a separate independent study during this hour with that kid. You know, so a lot of our electives will do that, like business and facts and things like that. So they'll add a couple kids in what you're talking about if there was not a lot of people that had signed up too.
Director Seelig.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I have a current high schooler. I don't know what grade he's going. 11th grade, I guess.
Yes, he'll be a junior.
Schedule. Kind of interesting. Back to my question. So the theme for the night, I kind of feel, is the board's role and how we work with other entities. And you mentioned just a little bit about this. So for clarity's sake, we talked about you look at how many students enroll for any particular class. But for the good of the cause, will you speak to the teacher contract and their limitations in terms of how many classes they can teach?
Yeah, so a typical classroom teacher, so if the way the contract's written right now, physical education and music maybe have higher numbers. But the typical classroom teacher, non-special education, so a general education teacher, per our 8-period day will teach 5 classes. That's typical. At a teacher contract of 160 students. So that's where that objective of the 32 per is a target. That's where that's one of the metrics we would use.
Director Edmondson, then Nathan.
So, as you know, we've had families who are unhappy with what classes are being run and aren't being run, and I know we do our best to communicate to them ahead of time, saying there's no guarantees, sometimes classes don't run. So I have two questions about that. Number one, if our main avenue of communication to the families is like at a Panther night or what have you, what percentage of our families are coming to those nights? So in other words, what percent of our families have been forewarned? And what other things do we do to communicate that information to them?
I think the best thing is review of the course registration guide, especially with the electives, because the required classes are going to run. They're required. With that whole elective piece, there's a significant number of elective courses that do not run based off of low enrollment. And so from our lens as principals is I can't be biased over one class over another, because that's that family's and that child's opportunity to diversify their elective process, because the required courses are very standard. And then there's the different levels of rigor that the student may choose to take. But the electives are the chance for the child to have their pathway, whether they come in with a pathway that they already have or they use it as exploration. So when you look at, if a kid comes in and says, do I want to take Mr. Batzloff's woodworking class, or do I want to take an Art 3 class, try to lay out what they're using their high school for. So we try to coach them up on that. We really don't get the numbers until we get the numbers. A great point has been in the last couple of years when the district had made the decision to take the 1.05 ed credit and the removal of the reading program. There were times with our wood shop, for the lack of a better term, industrial technology, what have you, what we all would know as the wood shop. I have a beautiful wood shop and there'd be one section running. That means 1 hour for an entire year for a semester course. Maybe a 0.4 FTE fax teacher. Now, because that has opened up our business, classes have had more opportunities. Our fax teacher is at a 1.9, I believe, FTE, and Mr. Batzloff is almost full-time as a Century teacher, but he teaches some of the classes with Mr. Olson with power mechanics. So there's a lot of layers to that question, because when we get those numbers in, it could be different from year to year based on what the graduation requirement may be for that class of kids.
So, but if we are relying on an informational night for parents of incoming ninth graders, how many do you think, what percentage do you think that's reaching, and what other methods of communication besides just giving them the booklet, which I don't even think we print anymore, right, and saying read all of these pages? How do we communicate? So the parents who have been unhappy, because unfortunately it's the parents we're hearing from more than the students, what other methods of communication do we have so that this won't happen?
Definitely those nights, giving the kids the information during their advisement types of periods, visiting the 8th grade feeder schools, having the non-public night, and having the information available for the families to see what the courses are, to really look at the requireds and then the exposure to the electives. The idea of whether we're running the elective or not is based on the whole idea of the elective and what we've discussed with the enrollment.
And the other thing is we really don't know that until we get those numbers. So when students are registering, so if it's a class that, like at Mayo, if we have a class of 5 that we don't run, we can't be calling home after every class.
Right.
So we just tell the students, you know, if your parents have concerns, please give me a call, because we talk to them and just say, hey, do this.
I think I wasn't clear. I meant the forewarning, not the once we know if the class is going to be offered or not. So for instance, we heard from somebody who wanted to have her child be able to take French 3 and 4. If I were an 8th grade parent and I learned, you know, French very rarely runs for 3 and 4, maybe that's something I'd like to know as an 8th grade parent, so I could steer my child into a class that is more often
The conversation that we have with families in regarding world language is, what's the motivation? Because there's 3 layers of motivation that could quite possibly be based on where the family is at. One, that they're intrinsically motivated to learn and take as much opportunity as they can with that world language. It may be to meet the requirement of a college and possibly a scholarship. So when we look at our data and you look at that trend data for some of those world languages, you have about a 40% attrition rate from year to year. And this is the first time since I've been at Century High School since 2010, where those numbers in those level 4 classes are dropping. Latin, for example, and then also we have combined the French 3 and 4, but those numbers are still starting to get smaller and smaller, especially that level 4 area of those elective courses. It's the same argument of the student that said, hey, you created all these really unique physical education classes, and I have a passion for doing exercise science and want to get out in the community, and you're not running my class either, so what other alternatives do I have? Again, that's the neutrality of the conversation that I have to show as I'm working with all the students on the fairness of one classes versus the other, specifically the elective courses.
And there is something also in the registration guide that talks about that as far as the disclaimer goes. And I know a
Right.
lot of parents get that online.
So basically, if they haven't read the registration guide, or if they haven't come to one of the informational nights when their child's in 8th grade, this is coming as an unpleasant surprise to them.
Yes, it could. It could be an unpleasant surprise.
Well,
you
if I
bet.
could just jump in there.
Director
Sorry,
Nathan is
sorry.
actually,
Go ahead.
So I understand that the course offerings is based year to year on what students choose, but I wonder how we're balancing that with our commitment to some of our pathways, especially in our CTEC pathways, because I know a lot of the courses, at least at Century this year, were Project Lead the Way courses in engineering and in biomedical science, entrepreneurial strategies in business, and in agriculture. So I don't know if this is a question you can answer or Mike can answer, but if we are marketing these CTEC pathways as being an experience that get you closer to the workforce, we're really talking about meeting our workforce needs. Some of these pathways lead to a certificate, so you really have to do 3 courses in sequence. But we're leaving it up to students who may not be fully informed about the benefit of doing a complete pathway, or even parents. How are we balancing that year-to-year change when, if this course isn't offered next year, you have missed the opportunity to complete the pathway in high school? So how are we thinking about that?
Well, I think what you can't say is every class we're going to run at this number, because certain classes you run at a smaller number, and some classes you can run at a much larger number. Our practice has been that any new class, we typically will run it that first year under what we normally would, just to get kids into the program. I understand what you're saying, but what it comes down to, when you only have X amount of dollars, you just can't offer everything just because everybody wants to take it. And we would work with the student to try to find a way to make that go. If the board has suggestions on how we could better communicate with parents and students, we're open to hearing that. I mean, it's in the course guide. It says right in there, I don't remember the exact wording, but we're not guaranteed that every course that's in this course guide. We couldn't afford to run every course that's in there. And these gentlemen are open to parents coming in and have a conversation, say, this is why we can't run it, and let's see what we can do to work it out for your child. So, if we were fully funded by the state and not have to worry about that, then we probably would have a little more freedom to run courses. I mean, we'd love to give kids all kids 7 choices of courses, but that's, I don't know how many more staff that would be, but we can't afford to do that. So unfortunately, you have to make tough decisions. We can't please every parent, every student, every year, because we just can't afford to do it.
Director Nathan?
And Mr. Fogarty and I have worked together on this communication issue for many years, and as working both with PTA parents and with Gateway. Gateway for a number of years has done a high school registration night for parents, and I will tell you that consistently we find parents are not aware of what you just said, Mike, about we are not funded, we cannot provide all the courses in the course guide, and we are not funded to provide 7th choices for all students. So I really think continuing to work to educate parents about it.
Nights, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Because I think the unpleasant surprise that comes later, and the need to plan in 8th grade, because these pathways, thinking about the conflicts you might have between choosing a second science class or a language class, It really is a plan that students have to make, especially with the double block classes when you go to C-Tech. That's the conversations we find, that a student finds they have an interest, they want to take advantage of it, but their schedule, or the way the schedule works, it just doesn't work out.
Director Marvin.
No, I was just going to say, I'm assuming you still have kids who are 8th grade or in 9th grade. They sort of map out a 4-year plan. And on the registration guide, Melissa, to your issue too, it's very clear that you have to provide alternatives because you put down the classes you want. But I think it's very clear. You got to fill in those alternative classes to those options because these may not run. And as disappointing as it is for students and families who have mapped out this 4 years, these are the classes my student's going to take. Sometimes it's like when they cancel a flight. You don't get there. It's not going to ruin your life, but that flight is not going, and it doesn't matter who you talk to. That plane is grounded, and it happens with courses as well. Sometimes they don't run. Sometimes you can't get the instructor that you need, like ASL. So.
Director Schulzner, then Nathan.
Kind of along those canceled flight lines, as we're planning our course, yeah, I appreciate the complexity of the situation because it's a very complex situation. But what I heard from those parents is an underlying, we wanted 4 years. I fully understand we can't afford to offer all the foreign languages all the time. It's totally based on student demand. But it doesn't seem that unreasonable to say, we're always going to have Spanish 1st through 4th, or pick the language or whatever the popular choice is. So for those parents who are sensitive to a 4-year foreign language, at least they have a choice.
Yeah, actually, the high school principals have approached me a couple years ago about that. I think when we were going through Chinese at the time, our 3 and 4 year enrollment was not warning that. We could do that, and I don't have a problem with that, but there's going to be some parents who are going to be up here talking because my kid really liked that Latin teacher, and now you're not offering Latin, and my kid's life's going to be harmed because they can't take Latin. But I mean, we could pick a couple of language and say we're going to guarantee we'll run, 4 sections. And
it just feels like a reasonable accommodation.
Yeah, they would. I mean, I think that was when we were having that conversation. You said, let's just say we're only going to offer this and guarantee it.
Yeah, our data with John Marshall and Mayo larger than us, our Spanish program has been, our data would suggest when we look at the historical data that as an incoming family that may be coming in this summer, that would be the exact conversation I would have with them, is what are you looking for your world language experience? Have them fill in the blanks on those questions,
right.
And then say, if this is what you're looking for, we've had the opportunity for a Latin and a Spanish, but our Latin numbers were low. But this is where our collaboration is super important with C-Tech and then the 3 high school principals working along with our staffs, is we've been able to provide a Latin 4 opportunity for our kids with the CIS opportunity still. And I think a common vernacular we could be using is, this isn't a cut to Latin at Century High School, keep in mind. We had low enrollment. I would define a cut as American Sign Language and Mandarin Chinese was a cut that came to the board because of the low numbers, and we finally made that cut. And then the other thing we do, working with Director Wichman's office and the principals and registrars in that guide, is if a class does not run for 3 consecutive years, then we have strong conversation if we should even run that course anymore, specifically at that school, but even in together. So we have a lot of those one-on-one conversations with families as much as we can. We certainly can.
And I just want to add, I have a lot of appreciation for Mr. Fogarty, and actually I'll throw in Friedel. our school's a lot bigger than theirs is in enrollment, and that 400 students does give our schedule a lot more flexibility at a bigger school than it does at Century, even though they have a fair amount of students. Same when I look at the middle school staffing and Friedell's in the room. It's just more difficult to do those kind of things in a smaller school with enrollment problems. You know, I'm a little more fortunate when we have 1,800 kids walking through our doors.
Are you suggesting high school redistricting?
No,
Mr.
That's what I was thinking.
Not this year. Not go there.
So you mentioned earlier that students got a little bit more flexibility when some of those graduation requirements were dropped. Is there any other options that we can look at it as a district to provide our students different kind of flexibilities in taking some of the other classes like health or PE? I know a lot of students who have chosen to take those at their own expense off school year so that they have met those requirements and they've opened up class periods to do it. Is there something we could do to make that option available for our students?
You know, I think with Superintendent Munoz's leadership, when we look at innovation, what are different ways we can deliver a platform? Think of a platform for delivering education. And I haven't vetted the level of intensity and level of rigor and preparedness that an online course for a language would offer versus having a face-to-face instructor. However, I ask these as a question, is that an opportunity that could be ahead of us as we look at some type of online learning platform, not only to attract our kids of the Rochester Public Schools, but as we also look at the mental health needs of our students. Coming into a big school might be intimidating for some kids, or they've had a bad experience, or they are dealing with some difficult situations. But how cool would it be to create that platform for that student to meet their need, where they could get some of the hybrid with having face-to-face, one-on-one time with an instructor, maybe when the building's not as busy, but also moving forward with their state standard requirement work, or having an online platform that could pull more students in. Already the collaboration we're doing where a class is appropriate with distance learning, when we're able to bring in multivariable calculus, I don't think you're going to find another district that gets to multivariable calculus. And the opportunities we've worked with Mr. D and Mayo staff and John Marshall's staff to do some distance learning along with the accounting, and some of the classes fit that. So that's where the relationship and the partnership with us coming together and the levels of the district to be able to say, what if, how might this look? And I think we can continue to, that's what we love about the passion about having these different opportunities for these 21st century learners, what that could look like. I mean, it's exciting. We have a problem to solve. So let's work on different solutions to get there.
I also appreciate Mr. Munoz has given a lot of flexibility in that, and Ms. Wichman and Ms. Peterson met with the high school principals asking basically that same question about a month and a half ago. And we're all open for suggestions and new things, so I think it's kind of exciting when you can start thinking like that too.
Director Edmondson.
I was just going to piggyback on what you said about multivariable calculus and really how extraordinary that is for our district to be able to offer. I'm not sure I've heard of another school that offers that as an in-building program, and the creativity in reaching out to the students in the other high school and allowing them to participate as well. I would like to see focus on the ability to go as far as a student is able to go. So not every student is able to get to that level at the end of 12th grade, but it would be disappointing if they weren't given that opportunity if they were able to, because I think those families are the ones who may choose to leave for other opportunities at other private charter surrounding district types of schools if we don't ensure ways of offering them to our families.
And I'm hoping that there's now new information and new discussion points to present to our principals. You guys have done an excellent job. I appreciate that.
You're very
And
welcome.
I think it's something that we as a board needed to hear, and the community probably as well, to know that there's no willy-nilly-ness occurring in terms of a course selection or retention or elimination. And you guys have done a very excellent job. It gives me great confidence in knowing that you guys are very deliberate and considerate in the process. And if there's additional new information, Director Schlusner and Nathan, then we'll move forward.
I was just thinking back to the athletic cooperations. I know at CTEC with, I believe, Dover Yoda, they've approached us for an academic situation. How often do we do that with our courses, with other districts?
It's probably more prevalent, and Director Bolison could probably speak to this more with special education services. I would say where that was probably the more prevalent practice that we would have in place compared to, we may have a student come in over from one of the private schools to take a course with us with shared agreements. There's those as well that we have in place. Certain level of classes, number of classes they can take to whether they're considered full-time, whether they're homeschool or with a different school, like a Schaefer Academy with a Century High School, what have you.
So it happens some, but not a whole lot.
Yes.
Outside of special education.
Correct.
Well, I think we would be the I would argue that at our high school level, we offer more than anybody in the area can offer because of their size, kind of back to what you were saying, because of the size. So, we're doing Dover Yoda, and we're starting Byron next year, and I think in previous years, actually some Lourdes students have taken some of the courses when we were at the White Building north of Target there.
Science, yeah.
So, and the intent, my understanding, the intent of that whole CTEC building was for it eventually to become a regional career technical center. So right now we're kind of testing the waters, but eventually, we have pretty easy agreements with the two schools now, but if we expand and open it up more, then it becomes a little more complicated because we're probably going to have to, it's going to increase our staffing, then we're going to have to charge a little more, and then you have some districts are a little reluctant to sending their kids because part of their money would go with the student, and they're concerned about losing that funding. And the way we have it now with the two schools, it's pretty cheap for them to do that right now.
Director Nathan?
So I know we received some updates through the process about the result of the last year of language. So just to be clear, can you just run us through what the final accommodations were for the students in the Latin 4 and the French, and if parents on their own have found an alternative to resolve it?
So Latin 4, based on the work we've done with Principal Olson and Principal Johnson over at John Marshall, we have that Latin 4 opportunity for our kids that are continuing on in CIS. And we do have a 1.0 FTE at Century for levels 1, 2, and 3. So again, I would reiterate that the class is not running at Century. It's not a cut in any way, shape, or form to the Latin program. Right now, our messaging to our French 3 and French 3-4 and German 3-4 has their most viable option at this time is an outside entity from an accredited institution, whether it's someone from MDE Online Learning. There's a couple of parents that have actually done a really great job of vetting some of the processes and looking at it. And once we get through graduation here on Saturday, and we will have the youngsters still there, 9th, 10th, 11th graders next week, that'll provide myself and for me specifically with Mr. Verdorn as our assistant principal to start looking at some of those a little bit more as opportunities for parents. And the message I have been with parents is if they have the opportunity to pay for those courses, then that is an opportunity for them to not have to reduce classes that they would take with us. And then we would pull in that transcript, and it would be on their transcript as we would with any of the other courses.
And I guess we had one major cut at our school this year. This is the first time, I've been there for 20 years, that we haven't run AP Bio, or AP Chem, and we only had 13 kids sign up. And it's not a cut to the program, but if we have more sign up next year, awesome. And our teachers know that, and our chemistry teachers are saying, all right, we got to promote that a little more next year and do a little bit of that. So, same kind of deal on our side.
Director Workman.
So just to ask you a question about that, so you don't have AP Chemistry next year, but you might the following year, but you're still working with the same amount of staffing, roughly, from one year to the next. So if you didn't have AP Chemistry, then would you need an additional 0.2 in staffing from either the staffing that you've been allocated or
We just didn't have enough kids to.
No, I understand that, but supposing, AP chemistry doesn't run next year, but the following year you have enough students for it. But do you get additional staffing for that? You have to still work within the staffing that you have.
Those kids come from a different class then. Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
7.05, closed session, negotiations.
Pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.03 Subdivision 1, I move to go into closed session to discuss labor negotiations.
I second.
Discussion. No need. All in favor?
Aye.
In closed session, 7:26.
Recessed.
Reconvene at 7:49 PM. 7.06, approval of 2018-20 Rochester off-schedule work guide. This is an action item. Be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District 535 does hereby ratify the 2018-2020 off-schedule work guide between the school district and off-schedule employees.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned, 7:50.